So let's start.
Yeah.
And I'm welcoming everyone to our fourth year of the International Interdisciplinary Seminar, or rather talk series in Romani Studies. And my name is Hanna Bakunova. I am a researcher at Uppsala University, affiliated researcher, but my main position now is the Tompkins visiting professor at the University of Alberta in Canada. And I just want to say a couple of words about our seminar series before we start. So we initiated this series at Uppsala University when I worked at the Center of Holocaust and Genocide Studies, former Hugo Valentin Center in the Romani Studies program. And administrative support was given by IRIS, Uppsala University Institute for Russian and Eurasian Studies. And financial support was given by Uppsala Forum for Peace, Democracy and Justice. And this series started in September 2022 in person only. So the idea was to invite scholars from completely different backgrounds, history, ethnography, linguistic studies, literature studies, anthropology, political science, law, and so on, to enlarge understanding of the Romani communities. But in years 2022-2023, we focused only on the genocide of Roma, because that was the project. And then since January 2023, we moved also on Zoom. I mean, we had events in person and then on Zoom, because I received many emails from people around the world who asked to join and to listen to the talks. But then in the following academic year, 2023, Stefan Lederich from the Roma Foundation joined us. And basically, we are co-organizing the event since that time. And I'm very happy because on the one side, we have academic organizer, Uppsala University, particular Institute for Russian and Eurasian Studies. And on the other hand, we have Romani community represented by the Roma Foundation. And I think this is the way how the organizations and the events should work, that we have cooperation between Roma and non-Roma. So since January 2024, we moved completely to Zoom. And we stopped to have any financial support. So we are working like volunteers with Stefan. But I'm very happy that still monthly we can organize such talks. And this year, every year we change a little bit. In the beginning, there were only academic talks. In the year 23-24, we also started to invite Romani community leaders and Romani NGO activists. And last academic year, 24-25, we also started to have book and journal presentations. And what will be different this academic year is that probably we will not invite with the talks Romani activists, but we will organize at least once a year panel with Romani activists to discuss certain problem. And we move to more academic presentations, but still we preserve book launches and book presentations. So these are minor changes for this academic year. And also, I'm very happy that we enlarge our geography, because we started with Europe, and now I'm in Canada. It means we include North America, and also we will have speakers from North America this academic year. And even better, now we include Turkey, which is between Europe and Asia, and this is like even larger, broader understanding of Romani, brings us understanding of Romani communities, and also inclusion of different scholars. And maybe Stefan will say a couple of words as well.
Very short. I mean, I think there is a need for a forum on Romani studies because it's very fragmented and very isolated. And I think the exchange is quite an important fact, and this is why we're contributing to the organization of this thing, which I think is really nice. I'm working also on some research themes together with some other scholars, and so I think it's really a good forum to have open discussions. And if we don't have that many people all the time, depending, we have a lot of people who actually watch the conferences after they have been done. So I think the format is proving itself, and it will take a bit of time until we have very much larger audience. But I think it's a very good thing, and I'm really glad that we have something from Turkey because I'm very interested in the Greek Roma community who was migrated to eastern to Western Turkey, Izmir region in 1920s. So now, Ozan, all yours.
Okay, thank you for this introduction. And thank you, Hannah, Hussein, and Stefan for inviting me to this talk.
Yeah, just a second. I just wanted to introduce you properly because I think it's very important that you are here today. And it's my pleasure to invite Ozan Uştuk from Turkey to be our first speaker and to kick off this academic year in studies. Ozan's about the Romani community of Urla near Izmir and title Urban Segregation and in Türkiye. And Ozan is truly interdisciplinary scholar. He has BA in sociology, MA in anthropology, and PhD in communication science. And now Ozan works as an associate professor of communication science at the Institute of Technology in Turkey. So we start this academic year not only with ethnographer and anthropologist and social science. Do you hear me well, right? Okay. So we start with truly interdisciplinary talk, and scholar from Turkey, again, as I said, enlarged our geography. And what is particularly important that we now pay attention to a very tiny community about which probably not many scholars really know. And such unique research also, I think, is very important because it brings us completely different knowledge about tiny communities. We used to speak about large communities in different countries, particularly European, and scholars are familiar with problems of those communities, with academic approaches. But I think what is important is, again, to bring to the attention of public smaller communities. And I'm stopping here. Ozan, the floor is yours. I just want to repeat that we record our talks.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, I am from Turkey. I work at İzmir Institute of Technology. And I'm an interdisciplinary social scientist. Maybe that's that's a way to define me because I've been in different fields, trying to come up with, different theories, different methodologies, and etc. But after my PhD work, I moved on to Roma and this tiny community, as you said. And the first part, actually, I want to talk about the framing of this tiny community, because when you think about Turkey, some say that there's 5 million Roma living here. And it is a large population. But again, I'm only going to focus on like 300-person village, right? So I am trying to begin with a 10-minute overview about the state of Roma people in Turkey and also how academic scholarship and Romani studies particularly has evolved over the past 2 decades. And this is
Maybe,
my presentation outline.
maybe Ozan, can you go on presentation mode because
Yes.
that would
Sorry.
be very helpful.
Do you see it now in presentation mode?
Yes, now it's yes. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. So when we talk about Roma in Turkey, we are talking about the largest Roma populations in Europe. So official numbers don't exist in Turkey, but they estimate about 5 million to some, maybe more Roma living in Turkey. And this lack of data itself the first significant political and academic challenge for us. And despite this deep historical roots stretching back to Byzantine or Ottoman Empire, this scholarly investigation of Roma communities was largely neglected. And the true turning point, the moment Romani studies took off in Turkey, happened in the near 2000s. And this wasn't an organic academic shift alone. It was primarily driven by a political catalyst, which was Turkey's EU accession candidacy. And this process forced local governments and the government of Turkey to adapt the policies. And in doing so, they unfortunately reluctantly but necessarily put the Roma issues on the agenda. And this external pressure of the EU, coupled with the burgeoning of Roma civil society, emerged in the 90s. And this created enough movement to form a new body of academic literature. And the political and legal challenges resulting from the EU process are how actually academic research, related to how academic research was shaped. And the legislative forms of 2002, 2004 allowed for this establishment of associations between ethnicity and culture for the first time. And the Roma community took full advantage of it. It's a good thing. And we saw an explosion of civil society organizations. As our research highlights, there were virtually no such groups in the early 20s, but there were 336 Roma NGOs by the 2020. And this movement wasn't just political response, it was an organizational and cultural self-assertion that researchers couldn't ignore anymore. So academically, the biggest shift came when the issue was officially acknowledged by the state. While Roma communities have always known their realities in terms of poverty, in terms of marginalization and such, the national political debate had largely excluded them until November 2009, because this is the moment we identify as the launch of the Romani opening, which was
Just a second. I'm apologizing. Can you again go to the presentation mode?
Is this going out?
It's yes. Now we have the full screen. Great, thank you.
Why is this happening? Okay. So, do you see it now?
Yes, that's great now. Thank you so much. It's working, and I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Okay, it's okay. So, the Rome opening. So this was a key governmental initiative, and this was an act to officially acknowledge the systematic discrimination. The launch of this plan suddenly troubles of the Roma people was significant on our political agenda, and this offers researchers a new landscape to analyze. And the core of the Romani studies now. Now let's look at what is this new wave of scholarship has actually been focusing on. So, all right. So the academic literature is overwhelmingly dominated by one important core theme, right? So it is socioeconomic exclusion. So in this era, we see concepts like marginalization, stigmatization, discrimination, exclusion. These are the pillars of research, and this directly mirrors the areas identified by international and national action plans, and particularly 5 critical areas we see in the Roma decade. So this framework puts emphasis on poverty, education, employment, housing, and health. And our literature shows different examples of them. So first one could be employment. So the studies consistently show that Roma individuals are systematically confined to informal and low status jobs. This is driven by the deep-seated ethnic discrimination that leads labor market segregation. So, for example, research from Turkey highlighted how Roma women face intersectional discrimination, how are they discriminated against, and not just for their ethnicity, but for their gender as well. And often feeling they have to conceal their ethnic identity entirely just to secure a formal employment. So the second important area was housing. So this area often generates the most controversial debates, especially in terms of urban regeneration projects, which are supposedly designed to improve urban life, but generally result in the displacement and further marginalizations of Roma populations. And the notorious case was, as many of you know, is Sulukule in Istanbul, which is an important example that has become a cornerstone in urban studies. This case illustrates how development can become a mechanism of exclusion and pushing Roma communities from central of the cities to the periphery, to the rural or semi-rural areas. And beyond socioeconomic issues, the literature clusters into 2 other important areas. The first one is identity, and the second one is state policies. And scholars have analyzed how Roma actively negotiate and resist pejorative representations, how are they construct their identities in contemporary Turkish society, and how they use music and different cultural forms to resist. And simultaneously, the study of state policies examine historical policies, tracing how Republic and the earlier Ottoman empires have governed and managed these groups and communities. And from this, we have neglected areas and transitions. So despite this progress in Romani studies in Turkey, the critical examination with FAICA, we saw that the scholarship reveals significant blind spots, which are important for charting the future of Romani studies. The first one was the research is predominantly about Rom communities, the majority of the Roma populations, but we have an insufficient understanding of the experiences of other important groups, such as Dom communities and Lom communities, and their socioeconomic status, their languages, and their unique identity negotiations remain largely under-researched. And the second one is that there is no comprehensive and historically grounded narrative that systematically analyze the modern Turkish state policies towards, this entire Roma population over the last century. And we need more rigorous long-term historical analysis to understand how these communities have had to negotiate with and resist the state power. And the finally is that methodological one. We need to advance in this area too, because while initial studies are valuable, we require more systematic, larger scale and comparative research across diverse regions to move beyond local case studies and small sample sizes. We also need to pay more attention to transnational alliances, and actually we are doing something like that here, but in terms of academia, but in terms of NGOs, we need more of that. And also the Roma activists are forming, global connections, impact local mobilization, identity politics. Again, these are important steps that we have to move through. And in closing this introductory part, what we see is a field that has moved rapidly from almost total neglect to a dynamic and critical space. However, the future research must be more intersectional, systematic, and also, most importantly, self-reflective. if it is truly represent the diverse and complex realities of Roma in Turkey. And if you want to know more about the state of the Romani studies, you can refer to our publication with Faik Çelik, published in journal Romani Studies journal, 2 decades of research on Roma in Turkey. So this is pretty much an overview of how Romani studies are flourishing in Turkey. But now I want to focus on my own research. So this is a small sample, a small neighborhood with 300 people. And the study essentially is a story of urban violence disguised as urban development, right? So to understand this conflict the Roma endured, we must first understand this village's transformation. For decades, it was, Urla was a relatively quiet farming settlement. However, in recent years, it has become a highly desirable destination for the upper middle class, the upper socioeconomic classes, and they were migrating from major cities like Ankara, Istanbul, and they have both brought them their demand for specific, expensive, and so-called calm lifestyle, which has led to a rapid and abrupt rise in land rent and property value. And this shift, driven by this capitalist class, wasn't just a market phenomena. It was a direct motivation for a strategy of forced exile against the low-income populations and mainly the Roma community. And this is straight out of the urbanization playbook, as described by David Harvey. So gentrification focuses primarily on neighborhoods like Sıra, where the highest profit can be generated by transforming low-income residents into high-income assets. And from this local municipality's perspective, Urla was a beautiful canvas, and the Roma people was the unwanted other, a stain that needed to be cleansed to realize the city's new and middle-class aesthetic. However, this wasn't the first time Roma community was relocated. We know that after 1923, the population exchange between Greece and Turkey, as Stefan mentioned, the ancestors of these Roma people were coercively moved to the center of the Urla and then eventually settling in Sıra neighborhood, where they, have built their lives ever since. But with this land values, the political pressures become too intense. The policymakers began openly strategizing to move the entire community outside of the town limits, and the neighborhood was marked for annihilation. And as you can see, this is the neighborhood. We have 16 districts in Urla, and Sıra is one of them. According to 2013 survey, it's about 300 person living in there, and it is actually situated in a 7.5 thousand square meters and with high population density. But then again, in terms of Roma neighborhood, this is the place. And the first migration, as I mentioned, was the Lausanne Treaty in 1923. So this is basically how they lived and still living. So let's talk about the trauma of displacement. So this atmosphere eventually exploded in the demolitions of 2017. And for years, the Roma people resides in this neighborhood had been fed vague promises from the policymakers about the potential property rights or alternative housing. And the houses they occupied often built on private property or state-owned land. But when the bulldozers showed up, it became brutally clear that any of the talk about the long-term expropriation of those lands or legalization of their, houses was an illusion, and the community's trust was shattered. And the act of demolition was more than just a physical destruction. It was an act of psychological violence. And houses were not cleanly leveled. They were half torn down, as you can see from these photos. As one of the residents observed that The ruins resembled a film set, which usually reinforced the fact that their dreams and their living spaces were unreciprocated. So this intentional and incomplete destruction served to strip this community of their spatial memories, their immediate hopes, and their aspirations for a stable future. And the trauma of deterritorialization was immediate and overwhelming. And when they faced with the loss of almost everything, one elderly woman simply told me that we don't know, we have nothing, and we have nowhere to go. And the official response to this was inadequate. And the temporary container houses were provided, but often late or insufficient in numbers, and it left those families with incomplete and temporary solutions. And this entire experience, the broken promises, the evasive official responses, the demolitions, those deeply entrenched the community's distrust in local authorities. And this was a critical point that links back to the first part of my talk, the government's nationwide Roma opening initiatives, which promised to eliminate discrimination, urban segregation, improve living conditions. And it turns out that it yielded limited visible change in the lives of the Urla residents. And for them, the official help was often seen as a merely mechanism to distract or deceive or control them. And this is kind of a disillusionment, and it was sharply articulated by the residents. A man came up, swung the shovel just like that, and Roma opening happened. Nothing changed. Is this the Roma opening? So this quote actually encapsulates the chasm between the grand state strategy and painful local reality. So I want to talk about the strategic discourses and the tactical discourses. I'm using Desarto's terms here to understand how the same experience could be narrated into two different forms. One side, there's strategic discourses, which were actually helps the governments or local authorities to manufacture consent. So the physical act of displacement had to be justified to the eye of the wider public. So if you think about it, no city government can simply say that we are displacing these people for profit. They needed a moral justification or for manufacturing public consent. And this is where the strategic discourse of authorities come into play. And during my research, I've observed a critical narrative shift in the municipal or local media about how they portrayed the Roma. So in the early phase of my fieldwork, between 2014, 15, 16, those years, officials generally viewed Roma as disadvantaged minorities. They thought about Roma that those are the people who deserve help through social policies and etc. But as the pressure of gentrification intensified, the discourse had to evolve to justify those actions. So the new narrative, increasingly associated with Roma, began, particularly crime, and therefore they have been signifying the Roma as the undeserving poor. And this strategic criminalization was enacted through specific and aggressive instances, like rumors would suddenly circulate blaming Roma for local robberies, or in one notable event, police confiscated all the motorcycles in the neighborhood, or a single stolen vehicle report. So a sweeping measure that targeted the entire community based on one alleged incident. And we have so many stories similar to that. And this manufactured turmoil served to stigmatize them, identify them as criminals, as thieves, and provided a convenient moral cover for gentrification efforts. And the central pillar of this was the term or the label undeserving poor. The label is the assumption that Roma lack of work ethic and are responsible for their own poverty. as sociologist Zygmunt Bauman have argued that this notion is essential to the capitalistic ethic as it allows to blame the victim. So this is a discursive strategy. And this strategy functions to create involuntary blindness in the public eye, preventing them from seeing the true structural reasons for Roma's labor market exclusion. Crucially, my fieldwork data directly challenges this prejudice. So the first one that I realized that there was this high job demand in the neighborhood, contrary to the stereotypes of laziness, of undeserving poor, stigma. The community's demand for formal, regular jobs has steadily increased over time. So young people in particular expressed a desire for decent jobs, decent lives, and this hasn't changed, but the stereotypes changed. And also employer bias. The structural obstacle is the market itself. So employers frequently rely on biases, ethnocentrism. They rely on stigma regarding the Roma as unreliable, as thieves, and they often demanded the local communities and municipality act as a guarantor for Roma workers. And this condition actually never imposed on other ethnic or other social groups. So another one is gendered exclusion, like factors like early marriages or single motherhood. Those create a profound lack of childcare in the neighborhood, which forces women into highly casual, informal jobs so they can be free to care for their children at unpredictable hours, limiting their access to stable employment. And those are, again, shows us that they cannot be actually undeserved of the governmental help. But the strategic discourse of this undeserving poor is, not a reflection of reality. It's a cynical or instrumental mechanism used by the local state to justify this, urban segregation and gentrification. And it simultaneously ensured that the perseverance of poverty by keeping Roma structurally excluded from the formal labor market. So this is actually how municipality created their own discourse and changed it, relying on the changes of the urban sphere. On the other hand, Roma also created their own narratives, own discourses, which I call them countercultural tactics. So I ask, how does a marginalized community fight back against such a powerful strategic discourse? Of course, they employ tactics, and I am using Michel Desartaux's seminal work in this analysis. We understand that strategies are the grand, long-term plans of institutions like the state or the municipalities, and operating from a position of power. And the tactics, on the other hand, are the creative and everyday maneuvers used by the weak or the subaltern to navigate this imposed system. And the Roma in the Sıra neighborhood engage in powerful form of countercultural production through these tactics. They didn't reject the dominant language of poverty. They strategically utilized the discourse of vulnerability to their advantage. They were actually trying to leverage and to emphasize their unjust and unequal position as citizens who are being unfairly targeted. And they used actually two key tactics. The first one was the tactic of childhood innocence. So this is a powerful move, a moral move, because they demand empathy and justice for their children, arguing that children should not pay the price for the alleged mistakes of their parents. And this actually taps into the universal moral code, hoping the wider society, Gajo or non-Roma, would not dare to hold their children responsible for the poverty created by, structural forces. And the second one is that the tactic of the docile Roma image. So this is perhaps the most fascinating, but also the troubling tactic. the Roma intentionally contrast themselves with the negative imagery of other marginalized groups like Kurdish people in Turkey, and often those groups are associated with militancy in the media to affirm their, and the Roma, for affirming their own identity, constructing themselves as unsimilar to those, try to affirm their identity as harmless, loyal to the state. They repeatedly emphasize, we don't throw rocks at soldiers, we don't rip out our flags. They were like nationalists. And whatever our state says, we do it without question. And these are, how they are trying to change the discourse into their own favor. And this is an instrumentalization of negative stereotypes. They are trying to position themselves as deserving of government help, precisely because they are viewed as passive and obedient. However, the analysis of these tactics reveal this critical limitation. By embracing the narrative of them being ignorant or docile, they inadvertently reinforce their own subordinate position as subalterns, lacking the cultural capital to fully fit in and advocate for themselves on equal terms. And this ultimately leads to a politics of helplessness, where the real and righteous anger stemming from their discriminatory treatment, but this anger turns inwards in the form of self-blame and fatalism. And as one of the residents told me that, reflecting on those demolitions and the broken promises, and they were saying, we don't know what to do. What can I say? I leave everything into the God's hand, right? So this self-blame is a profound psychological injury that fixes their representation as passive and accepts their marginalized fate, and becoming a key founding theme of their daily identity, which is actually a counterproductive discourse on their part. So in terms of conclusion, the ethnographic case demonstrates this powerful and multi-layered mechanism of urban exclusion, right? First, an economic shock, the sudden surge in land value triggered by an exile strategy, and then second, to make an exile morally, palatable, authorities employed strategic discourses that successfully manufactured public consent by labeling the Roma the undeserving poor and criminalized their identity. And the third is that the Roma fought back with tactical narratives of vulnerability and loyalty, yet these tactics failed to bring about the emancipation they needed. Why? Because the state sovereignty, through its unpredictable and violent policy shifts, succeeded in keeping the Roma community in perpetual limbo. They were neither fully rejected nor fully accepted. And this process dictated a cultural hegemony that consistently injured their sense of justice, their sense of belonging. And the most profound finding of our research, I think, is the ultimate psychological impact, the experience of persistent victimization and the resulting helplessness, which erodes the foundation of their cultural identity. The anger stemming from this urban policy, this violence, mostly turns inwards, manifesting as self-blame and fatalism. This study thus argues that, gentrification is not merely an economic or spatial process, but a profound cultural and psychological process that fixes the Roma as subalterns in a state of eternal waiting. And they are still waiting, by the way. This research started in 2014, and the state of the neighborhood almost unchanged. So this eternal waiting, this helplessness and self-blame, the cycle of exclusion is not only reproduced by the state action, but tragically maintained by the community's own internalized response to that action. So in terms of academic help, in terms of NGO, we actually need to create a dialogue with the community and create a more emancipatory process to help them. So this is the reality of the Urla neighborhood, and I want to actually engage with different NGOs. I've done it before with different NGOs, but the progress is so small that sometimes we get discouraged. And there's this too many layered process that we cannot undone in just simply understanding what's going on. But I think understanding what's going on, especially this multi-layered phenomena, helps us to, realize that we have to start somewhere, and more in depth we understand the situation. We use ethnography and other case studies, and use different theories to analyze the situation. The urgency, the need to make a change actually becomes clear to us. So yeah, that's basically my presentation. So these are the publications that we have on the topic. These are the references, of course, and the first study with FAICA is actually could give you a lot of ideas about how the Romani study research and scholarship is developing in Turkey. And then maybe we can talk about to create different alliances between NGOs and academia, and transnational alliances like we are trying to today. Yes, so thank you for listening. I hope this wasn't too long.
No, it was perfect. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you so much. Thank you so much, Ozan. It was very interesting. And I think we can move to the questions, right?
Sure.
If anyone has questions. Hussein, okay. Because I also have question. Okay, Hussein, let's start with you.
Okay, I can start. Thank you, Ozan, for your presentation. In terms of studies, you mentioned about the start of publications about Roma in Turkey, rather a recent phenomenon. My question is about academia itself. There is, I think, please correct me if I'm wrong in this observation. I think there is a lack of minority studies. There has been lack of minority studies in Turkey for various reasons. One of which is the political one, avoiding recognition of certain groups living in Turkey. If this observation is correct, then we have had at least lack of scholars in the universities in Turkey who could have an understanding of how minority groups could be studied. First of all, if my observations in that regard are to the point, if that is the case, how that lack of scholarship or expertise is evolving in Turkey without having centers for minority studies or institutes dedicated for such studies. Thank you.
I don't have a clear answer to that. This is a hard topic in terms of politics and other areas, but I don't think that ethnic studies aren't evolved as particularly as Romani studies. So when you look at the studies in terms of Kurdish studies, Alevism, other ethno-religious communities, we have abundant of studies regardless of the pressures from the policymakers and politics and etc. But in terms of Roma, they were neglected. So that I think that's the case. Before, in the 80s, there was this surge of Kurdish studies. In terms of sociology, anthropology, political science, we can actually saw a lot of studies have been done. But in terms of Romani studies, this is very correlated between the 2009 Romani opening, because before that Roma people were just there. They weren't creating problems. They weren't actually making a scene in terms of policy, in terms of nothing. Actually, they were just living their lives, distant from the center of the cities, or even if they are in the cities to, I don't know, sell flowers and, that type of thing, they were just stereotyped as docile others, They weren't just stereotyped as others or ethnic groups who wanted their own sovereignty or who wanted to, I don't know, resist the government. So they were, in the perspective of the government, were docile. That's why it wasn't a hot topic, I think, for the scholars. But now, after the 2009 Roma opening, we have the surge of NGOs that have been established in Turkey. And this actually intrigued academics to look to the field. But I think it's still new. I think there is a lot of research that is done in, I don't know, lacking in academic rigor. So we actually, yeah, I don't know how to talk about this, without being judgmental, but yes, we need more rigorous research and we need to connect with different academics. I have collaborated with 2 or 3 people in Turkey now. And without collaboration, I'm friends with 1 or 2 people who are working in the Romani Studies field, but it's not like, Europe, it's not like, CU or, the Harvard, the other places, we are not actually bringing our collaboration right now. Everybody is doing their own work, individually. So there's this lack of collaboration in terms of Romani studies in Turkey. But the other ethnic groups, some groups, yes. Now I'm actually working on Arab Alawites in Turkey, so another neglected groups. But even then, I can find some literature on it. I think the important part is that when those studies became hot in terms of, academic interest, now Romani studies is in the verge of death, I think. So we'll see.
So what you say is that if Roma don't create so-called problems, then nobody is interested in researching them. Is it correct?
Yes, almost. There's also nuance, but yes, it wasn't the case because they actually wasn't on the agenda, of the
Does it apply to other minorities or only to Roma?
I think, yeah, to Roma, yes, that's for sure. But some minorities, perhaps. So we don't hear about Arab Alawites again, as an example, But in terms of ethno-religious groups like Alevism and other groups, we know them because they are in conflict with the, current policies of Turkish government, right? Because, in terms of religion, Alevism, is a minority sect in Turkey. So they are demanding rights. So when they demand rights, they get attention. But Roma, until, 2000s, they didn't demand rights. So they weren't on the agenda. They weren't on the, interest of the academics, of the politicians. But, after 2009, I think 2 Roma elected as, in the government as MPs, right? So the landscape changed, the interest changed, and the interest also affected the NGOs, and NGOs affected the, communities, and now communities are demanding more. Fortunately, by the way, that's a great improvement on their part, but I don't think that's enough, and I don't think the discourses are helping them to emancipate enough. They have to create a more academically engaged emancipation process.
Yeah, I think actually our problem, general in the world, that why Romani studies are not developed very well because of lack of lobbying in political sense. I don't know, I feel it in many countries that basically until Roma is not elected to the government, nobody does anything. And here I also wanted to follow what you say. And okay, we talk about interdisciplinarity, and you say that in Turkey, a couple of scholars only research Roma, but they're not connected and don't have common projects. Generally, in Europe, I think, and in North America, even though everyone talks about interdisciplinarity, still there is lack of understanding what is it. And historians usually don't attend the presentation of anthropologists and other way around. But I wanted to ask you the reasons why in Turkey you have only few researchers and there is no connection between. It's one question. And the second, also the reasons why academia doesn't work very well with NGOs in Turkey, because you mentioned that you tried a couple of times and somehow it doesn't work. So what are the reasons behind? How do you think?
So in order for me to answer that question, I have to criticize how universities are working today. It's going to deepen the issue and etc. But we are living in a publish or perish era, right? So every academic doesn't have the time to go with the NGOs, give their lot of time to the field and try to change things. Academia is turning away from the field in terms of not non-academic, but related issues. So I think one of the issue might be there. And also I am criticizing the Romani Studies era in Turkey, but relative to Europe, it's not too bad, but still the Europe has more connections, as I see, more collaborations than us. And I don't know why we don't collaborate enough. And we started to, actually, I started to with some Romani scholars, but I don't know. I cannot answer that.
And what about NGOs, Romani NGOs and academia in Turkey? And then
So this is another hard topic. So we saw the rise of the NGOs, right? And a lot of the NGOs are actually happy with the European projects, horizons and etc. They used it, but they didn't use it on the field. They use it to their favors. I'm not talking about all of the NGOs, but in terms of, aside from some that doing important work, a lot of them saw this situation to gain a profit. So that's why we have too many NGOs, but only 10% of them actually working. I think that might be one of the problems. As I talk, I start to feel that, I am a bitter person now living in Turkey. But that's the situation because I try to work with a lot of them. Sometimes you hit a wall, you try again, and this is a hard field to be on.
This is basically the platform of addressing the questions and criticism. I mean, we don't limit any presenters or commenters or those who ask questions, any audience from criticism or, to prevent some unpleasant questions, because I think we are lacking this in academia, we are lacking this also in public sphere.
Sure.
And Stefan?
Yes, so I must say I really liked your analysis of the instrumentalization of the Roma from the state and their reaction to it, because it is not actually limited. Well, it's probably more pronounced in Turkey than in other countries, but it exists in other countries, also in Central Europe, in a lot of neighborhoods in near larger cities, Vilnius, Budapest. We have all those things very similar to what you. But I've never seen such an analysis. So really, very impressed by this result. One question I had, because you mentioned Sulukule, and you mentioned also, 2008 as being the awakening and thing. But I mean, I was involved. We were involved in funding the resistance in Sulukule in 2004.
Wow.
already. So it was Sulukule, the eviction of Sulukule started really early 2000s under the first thing. So it's a bit before even.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we agree on that because you said 2008 was really where the instrumentalization and the
Yeah.
Roma awakening came, but this eviction was nearly complete by 2010 and 2011. I mean,
Sure. I think the 2009 the Roma opening, the Sulukule is the reason, I think.
yeah.
Or at least one of the reasons that the Roma opening happened.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the cause where
Yeah, one of the causes, yes.
yeah.
But it became clear that Roma is here, they exist among us, they had issues, they became a political identity
Mhm.
with Sulukule,
Yeah.
right? So other Roma communities started to look out.
Mhm.
So it actually created something, it moved something to, result in 2009 Rome opening, I think.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, by the way, for your support in this matter.
No, it was,
We
I
have,
mean, the first, I went there actually, I mean, I don't think so. Speaking Romanes in Sulukule was quite amusing and interesting experience. And it was a really nice neighborhood. And it was actually one of the oldest Roma Mahala in the Ottoman Empire. Well, it was Byzantine.
Byzantine.
It was still a Byzantine Mahala.
Yes, it
So
was. So, yeah. Also, when we look at, urban studies perspective,
yeah.
almost half of the papers written about Roma is about Sulukule, by the way.
Okay. Okay.
If we can find 15 papers, 7 of them is about Sulukule.
Okay. Good to know. Good.
More questions? Bożena said thank you so much, and she had to leave because she has class.
Okay.
Now, so do you have more questions? Zane, okay.
Well, I can ask if another person has no questions. My question will be about the impact of NGO work. I have very maybe limited observation of some of the NGOs operating in Turkey with European funding, and their narrative was quite interesting. It is, I think, because their European funding, they are still out there. They are using the European narrative in Turkey, in Turkish language, in an effort to construct and kind of solid identity for Turkish Roma. And it sounded quite out of place to me when I was reading about this Turkish Roma NGO telling about the Roma, the genocide the Roma suffered, which is kind of hard to sell or hard to construct upon a Turkish identity or group identity. What are your observations about the NGO narratives in Turkey? In which other ways that narrative is developing in terms of community identity formation?
So this is another hard question, I think. They are using European linguistic, codes in terms of Romani studies because some, scholars, they are rare, but they are Roma and went to Europe and educated and, they brought the language into Turkey. And some of them are useful and some of them are, as you said, out of place, because it doesn't actually, coincide with the situation in Turkey and situation with the field itself. I don't know how it's going to be. I think it's another future research has to be done in this, particular question that you asked, how the narrative of the European, Commission or other institutions regarding Roma how they define Roma, and then how it applies to Turkey. Actually, in some ways it applies, in some ways it doesn't. And when you think about it, it is a academically structured discourse, the European discourse regarding Roma. But in terms of Turkish reality, there's this gap between, cultural capital. Maybe we can say it like that, cultural capital. So it is not a, bottom-up request. It is a top-down discourse. So, I think we are going to see a lot of conflict between how they navigate this discourse, in the upcoming years.
If I may intervene.
Sure.
Thank you.
The Western European discourse is strongly based on the German and Western European view of Roma and the persecution, and also to a lesser extent on the Romanian slavery experience.
Yes.
It doesn't apply to the Balkan.
Yes.
Or it doesn't apply to Russia, Ukraine, and so on. Especially to Balkan and the Ottoman Balkan. Historically there was no repression against Roma. So all this persecution discourse is actually not fitting in the historical context of the Ottoman Empire.
Yes. That is
The
correct.
nationalistic creation of Turkey is a different matter, and that's where maybe we can trace things. But the historical context is totally out of place there.
Yeah.
From my perspective, at least.
No. I agree with you. And the one point that we miss all the time, and it is still a problem in my head, is that we are trying to define Roma as a ethnic identity, but when we look at different places, we have different hybrid identities. So identities like that, it's in flux, it's always changing. So we are trying hard to define what Roma is. But then again, every little community have been creating their own subculture in a way that they are totally different. So when we use the term Roma, or some prefer Gypsy, or GR, too many differences. I, as an ethnographer, want to use the term the society wants them to identify with. Right? It's their choice and etc. But in terms of a more ethic understanding, in terms of scientific questioning, as Stefan said, they had totally different experiences. The Roma in the Ottoman Empire,
Yes.
and the Roma in Second World War Germany, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are actually different. In terms of historical roots, they may have similarities, and they may have come from a similar place or similar historical roots, but in the long run, they dispersed around the world, and they have created different cultural particularities. So
there I disagree, because culturally, it's amazing how common tales, paramecias, the stories and traditions are still similar between Russia, Balkan, Spain, etc., where people have been separated by 5 or 6 centuries. So when they have the language, definitely you still see a lot of commonality, and a lot of the populations that you have in current Turkey come actually from Greece and from Macedonia and from Bulgaria, because a lot of the Roma from Bulgaria were exported with the Turks during the Zhivkov era. Also, that's another migration that one has forgotten about, but it involved quite a few Roma, because Roma in Bulgaria and in the Balkan generally speak Turkish, also Ottoman Turkish, but not.
Yes. But again, we shouldn't ignore the particularities, because I have discovered that in a weird way, because one NGO actually came into Urla neighborhood and tried to explain themselves, what they do as an NGO, and etc. And they were totally from different worlds. I have more commonalities with Urla neighborhood than this guy coming from another neighborhood, and he is also a Roma. So when you think about it, the way to, way of life, how to see things can change immensely to neighborhood, even in one town. So we have to be aware of both, structural forces, political issues, and etc., and how,
I mean,
their,
it,
definition of Roma impacts the identity, but also the little everyday practices and discourses that creates this subcultures, and they are sometimes so different than the other ones. So we shouldn't actually understand them in terms of a heterogeneous community, all together.
well, I mean, for me, always the best analogy is the German Swiss cantons. It's a very good analogy because in for the German Swiss canton, nobody needs to say that they're Swiss when they speak Swiss German because
Mhm.
only Swiss do that. You don't even need to say where you're coming from because it's also obvious from the way you speak where you're coming from. Each of the canton has its specificities. Some dislike the other ones, but all in the end are still Swiss when they're outside of Switzerland.
Yeah.
In Switzerland, you're Bernese or from Zurich or from Basel, not a Swiss. Or even from this village and the other village is, or in some places, Oberländer, the guys up the mountains and the guys down the mountain, and they don't like each other. So it's very much like this. But still,
Yes, I agree.
the concept is exactly the same.
Yeah.
And the difference, there are different groups, and the different groups are originally socio-economic or migration driven, and then further adaptation in the 20th century have created a more fragmentation or more subgroups as such. And
Also,
yeah,
I think the new media exacerbated this,
yes.
the new media creates different subgroups, even among, the same, there's this, in terms of our new realities, after the internet era and etc., we have to actually talk about how new media actually affects now, when we look at different media accounts of Roma groups, if you analyze them in terms of a, discourse content analysis, you actually would surprise that how they actually try to, identify the ideal Rom, and they are in disagreement about all of the things.
That's I'm not surprised.
So
What is fascinating here is also how the stereotypes against the Roma, I mean, all those negative and also positive stereotypes are spreading everywhere. I mean, in Turkey, they're the same, as you say, they're thieves, they're lazy, they're poor, everywhere is like that. In the same in Europe, the same basically, even in partially in North America. Recently, there was published report in Canada about the discrimination of Roma here, even though, in fact, I'm not sure that people even know about Roma in Canada, because for my students at the University of Alberta, like one of the 4 largest and most important universities in Canada, students first time heard about Roma. So, and another issue that about those stereotypes, how also Roma themselves are spreading those stereotypes. So in Europe, all Romani communities, at least whom I know, are strongly against to use the word gypsy, because of course it's the pejorative word. Everybody uses Roma and Sinti, but the same European recently Ukrainian NGO published a text about Chingene. And even after I explained that Chingene actually is the same like gypsy, that it's a very negative word which shouldn't be used. They just corrected to so-called Chingene, but they didn't remove it. And here we see a huge gap between actually what's going on beyond so-called core of Europe.
The funny thing is that there is a term for uh, Turkish Roma, Khorahane. Roma, in Romanes.
Horahane.
Horahane.
Horahane. I think I don't think Horahane is from Turkey. Horahane is from
No, the term in Romanes, Horahane are Turks.
Horahane are Turks.
Yeah, that's the Turkish, it's the Romanes word for Turkish. Don't ask me where it comes from, but that's
Interesting. Nidi Treyan actually worked with Horahane groups in, I don't know where, in one of the Balkan countries,
yes.
and she talked about Horahane Roma all the time, but
Yeah.
I didn't know that Horahane was.
Horahane Roma are generally the ones who speak, have, besides Romanes, Turkish or have lost Romanes and only speak Turkish.
Oh, that's good. I know that.
It depends on the context.
Always.
Ukrainian Roma from Crimea also say that or they sometimes, I mean, how they say, okay, let's put it to more scientific way. In Ukraine, some Roma from Crimea and south of Ukraine are Muslims, but others are, particularly central Ukraine, are Orthodox. And Orthodox Roma, even from south of Ukraine, they call Crimean Muslim Roma Horahane. And then those Muslim Roma, when they want to explain and to be understood, also say that as Horahane, referring to how they are called by Orthodox Roma in Ukraine. And at the same time, also I know that Czech researcher Martin Fota researched Horahane community, which is Christian community in Brazil. And they call themselves Horahane. So it's not about this. I mean, how I just wanted not to emphasize the Romani words, but how stereotypes also are spreading by not only by non-Roma, but also by Roma. And
unfortunately, yes.
To emphasize this gap between Europe, like Germany, France, I mean Europe, core Europe, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, France, to a certain extent, Poland, Czech Republic, Romania, Ukraine, and how they completely don't understand what's going on beyond this world. I don't know if, Ozan, you had this experience of comparison.
Yes, I actually like your, expression. I've, presented my research in different arenas, different scholars. They have difficulty to grasp the situation in Turkish poverty, and the Roma people's poverty in here, because when they think of poverty, they think of something different than that. I told you that, should I actually put some photographs or not, because I don't want to, use this as a way, but I have to, show them. Because when, especially NGOs from Europe, when I talk with them about the Roma people of Turkey and how they live, their imagined poverty doesn't look like ours. I could have lived in their imagined way of poverty, because this is, too hard. Even in terms of the states, when they talk about poverty and when they actually shows us those houses and etc. Sometimes I think about, I could have lived there. So there is a relative poverty, I think. And, in terms of Turkey, they couldn't actually imagine how they live. There's this cardboard stuffing over their houses that soaks up all the rain. That type of, you cannot even imagine sometimes. And, a lot of my colleagues from Europe cannot imagine until they see it, and, I show them the neighborhood and they were like shocked.
I mean, if you go to Slovakia, it's exactly the same.
Sometimes they say that, but I don't know. I have to go to Slovakia then to see if it's the same.
No, it's the same. It's the same.
Really?
Yes.
And Balkan and Turkish experience are more similar, I think. But
no, Balkan is a bit richer. Slovakia and Hungary are the poorest.
Are the poorest.
Yes.
In Ukraine, some
also.
communities live in the same way.
Yeah. And let's put it that way, the temperature is a bit different also on top of it.
anyway, I think that we have to speak up how it is. We have to show our research how it is. I mean, also photographs without hiding or also without extra promotion. But I mean, we of course we are not objective, but we have to try to at least to show our understanding. So, and I'm very grateful to you, Ozan, that you also gave us this understanding of Romani life in the photographs, because it's hard when you say poor, everyone thinks poor in own term, right?
Yes,
one
relative.
Turkish Roma living poor, and for another person poor not to have extra yacht or something like that. So we have different, but I think we exceeded our time for 20 minutes and I think we have to finish. Thank you so much, Ozan. Already I know that in Turkey it's 20 past 9 p.m. Very late. And thank you so much, everyone who joined. And even though there were no comments or questions from Carl and Robert and Božena, who left recently, and some others. So still, it's great that we have your talk and it's recorded, and we will put this online. More people can see it. And I hope for our further cooperation between
definitely.
us.
Sure.
Good.
Sure, I would like that. It was a great meeting. Thank you for inviting me.
And we keep in touch because I think we have quite a few discussions to have.
Yes, sure. And I think that's how we improve. That's a great way, because my mind is not set, when I hear something else, immediately my, understanding changes. And I think that it's, how it's supposed to be, right?
Yeah,
so
it is.
All
I
in mind.
really enjoyed.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, great. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
very much.
Good
Thanks.
night, everyone.
Good night. Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.